Hello, and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I am Rose Lucibello, Senior Planner, Alumni Events. Thank you for joining us for today's lecture, The Future of Books, What and How You're Going to Read, with Matthew Bucemi, Assistant Professor of Book Publishing, Faculty of Arts and Professional Studies. I accept the responsibility to acknowledge the land I am on. Because we're not gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory you are on. Please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on. The website nativeland.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, we'd like to conduct a quick poll before each session begins. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up on your screen right now. I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Thank you. It's helpful for our speakers to know more about who is in the audience. If you need help with Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is ready to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions to our guest speaker during the Q&A period following today's presentation. Please note that all your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes. We ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Matthew Bucemi. Dr. Matthew Bucemi is an assistant professor of book publishing at York University. He is the founding head editor at Sutherland House Books in Toronto and has held lead creative roles at Maclean's, Zarme Publishing, Incognito Press, and Netflix. Dr. Bucemi earned his PhD in English literature from Cornell University, and he became a Canadian citizen last year. We are pleased you could make the time to join us today. Welcome, Professor Bucemi.
Hi. Can you see me, hear me?
Yes, great. Please go ahead and share your screen, and I will be back after your presentation for the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody out there. I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully this works. Share. Current slide. Okay, hopefully that's okay. Can I get a thumbs up from someone on the staff that everything's good?
Sounds good.
Probably fine. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, Rose. Very happy to be here to speak to you all. Looking forward to a great discussion. So the topic of today's talk is the future of books, what you're going to read, and I think more importantly, how you're going to read it in the years to come. So I thought this would be interesting to a lot of you. Like what changes is the industry going through right now? What do publishers think is going to be like the next big trend? And what can you expect? So why don't we jump in? Rose already gave me a great introduction, but I put a slide here anyway, so I'll go through it really fast. I have an academic background in English literature, but after being a professor for a few years, I went into industry. And I spent about 10 years as an editor, ghostwriter, did acquisitions at Netflix. I was director of like a book ad agency. And then I founded, as the head editor, a small press here in Toronto. So I have a background that's academic, but also professional. And that's sort of what I'm bringing to students at York. And that combination of insight is what I can bring to you here today too. I'll start with a poll question. So it's the first poll question. I have a few, just want to get some feedback. Did any of you buy a book in the last 6 months? Anybody listening to this today? Could be any kind of book. I think we have like 80 people on the call or so. So I wonder. I have a feeling I know the answer. So 92% said yes, which doesn't surprise me because books are still extremely important, culturally valuable, financially successful, even though we have this narrative that books are dead or dying, right? I'm sure you've all heard this before, that novels are on the way out, that the internet or video games or TV is going to kill the book. I mean, people have been saying that or something like it for a long time. I remember I read something that Jules Verne said in 1902, which was, because of newspapers getting widely distributed, who's going to want to read a book? They'll get fresh stories every single day and the novel's not going to exist anymore. Well, of course, that didn't happen, right? And books seem to have a kind of cultural permanence that isn't going away, at least anytime soon. And I have a sneaking suspicion that books in some form are always going to exist unless something dramatically changes about our culture. That could happen in 500 years, but in our lifetimes, I don't think so. So what I want to talk about today is not the idea of books dying, which you may have heard before. I'm here to tell you that books are definitely still alive, definitely still thriving creatively and economically, but they are changing, especially in the way that they are conceived and the way that they're going to be delivered. Someone in the chat says that they get their books from the library, which, yeah, that's totally true. Like, libraries aren't going away either. Bookstores aren't going away. Just the way that we interact with them might change a little bit. So with that in mind, I have a second poll question for you. Here are 5 books. What do these 5 books have in common? I wonder if anybody knows. So is it that they've all been made into TV shows or movies? Is it that all of these books were aimed at readers over 30 years old? Or is their connection Reese Witherspoon? Tell me what you think. Okay, so 85% of you said they've all been made into TV shows or movies, which is definitely true. 9% of you said that they are all aimed at older readers, which is mostly true. Only 6% of you said Reese Witherspoon. But guess what? Reese Witherspoon is the connection between all of them, which may surprise you. Reese Witherspoon has a production company called Hello Sunshine. And through Hello Sunshine, she has a very popular book club. And Reese Witherspoon starred actually in some of those adaptations that we just saw. But more importantly, she was a producer on all of them. And the reason I bring this up is because Reese Witherspoon has been very innovative in creating a book to media content pipeline that the book industry is very interested in replicating. Like, this used to be something that was more for young adult titles. Your Harry Potters or your Twilights, stuff like that, where when those books were acquired by the publisher, they were acquired with content distribution in mind. So they were acquired as a package, Like, we're going to do this as a book, yes, but there's also going to be merchandise, maybe a TV show, hopefully a movie series, and so on. And that strategy has worked really well for young adult stuff. And Reese Witherspoon's insight was to say, why can't we do this for adult aimed content as well? So the publishing world has taken notice, and the book to media pipeline has become much more aggressive. So publishing houses, especially the big ones, are teaming up increasingly with Netflix, with Amazon, to create these content deals that as soon as they acquire a book, they're making sure that it's a package that can travel cross-media wise right away. I mean, the thing that used to be is that if a book was successful, it would get a movie adaptation eventually, maybe a year or two later, right? But now the thinking is, let's just plan everything from the beginning. We're going to set this up. These books like Nine Perfect Strangers or Big Little Lies and so on, we're going to set this up from the very beginning to be not just a book, but to be a content franchise. And I think the reason that I bring this up is that the types of stories that are getting acquired right now, the types of books that are getting a lot of money for advances are influenced by this process. So writers are writing proposals that can do this kind of thing, right? And the books that you saw earlier on share certain traits that make them media pipeline contentable, right? They're like a little bit scandalous. Maybe a lot of them involve human relationships. There's a lot of stuff about things like affairs, illicit romance, drama, trauma, emotional pain. They all share those kinds of things and those things are easily translatable into a TV show, right? Capturing, especially older viewers. All these books are aimed at people that watch Amazon Prime. And so what do you see coming into publishing houses? Manuscripts that look like these books. Because the idea is, well, my book isn't just going to be a novel, but it can translate into an Amazon show. And whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'll leave to you to decide. It's just to say that the types of books that are put out there are going to increasingly look more and more similar, because the idea of getting picked up by an Amazon or Netflix to be adapted into a TV show or to a movie was very attractive for many authors. So it may create a kind of homogeneity, at least for like mass market popular titles. I don't think that like literary books that are artistic first and foremost, aren't necessarily going to try to do this model. But when it comes to mass market popular books and commercial fiction, I think you're going to see things that look kind of similar to each other more and more down the line. And so don't be surprised if you pick something up and think like, oh, this kind of reminds me of that Amazon show that I saw recently. Well, there's a reason for that. This is why publishing houses are keyed into this model. And they're also interested, you see, in that case, like the Amazon content pipeline to go from book to movie is more for like older readers, especially readers who are over 30 or at least over 25. For younger readers, the industry is looking at a kind of different model. I'm curious if anybody here, this is poll question number 3. Does anyone here play games on their phone? Any kind of game? Video game or puzzle game or whatever. So about half of the respondents said it's almost 50-50 split. Half yes, half no. The only reason I ask is just because to see like who is familiar with the model of these games. If you've ever played a game on your phone, it's like usually like these fun time waster kind of things. And normally these games give you a certain amount of time to play them, at which point they'll say, well, you need to add some kind of special coin into the app to keep playing, right? And sometimes those coins you get for free through the app by doing different activities or by playing a lot. And sometimes you could pay actual money to produce those coins in the app to keep playing. These phone games and this style of coin-based interaction have influenced a series of very popular comic book apps, principal among them Webtoon, which you see here. And this is the way that a lot of young people under 25 read in general, but definitely the way that they read their comic books. They're not going to a store, to buy single issues of Spider-Man or whatever. They're reading them this way. And these apps are directly influenced by those phone games. And that style of like, you could read a little bit. Hey, you want to read more? Well, you have to have this special coin. You get coins by rating our app on the App Store or by doing different things in the app, or you get coins just by shelling out actual cash. Why do I bring this up? Because the industry has really noticed how successful this has been with younger readers. They are trying to create literary apps that will do the same thing. And these apps already exist. And if you know anyone who is 20 years old or 19, there's a good chance the last book they read was through something like this. The way that these apps work is that you can preview a book and like rent a chapter by paying a coin through the app. If you don't like it, you can move on. If you really, really like a book, well, you could pay money to get the whole thing all at once. So it sort of like keeps you hooked in by having you always pay these special apps through your phone. The style of like going to a bookstore or going on Amazon and paying a one-time fee of $20 for a physical book, for a lot of younger readers is a bit outdated. Like, well, maybe I'll just pay $1 to try this book. If I like it, maybe I'll pay another $10 later. And it keeps you kind of interacting with the app because the more that you read, you get more of these coins. Maybe you don't have to pay money right away, you can pay it later. And this means what types of stories are being told on these literary apps. Acquisitions for young people are increasingly about serialization. So there's this idea that when you read a book or even just a chapter, it's not self-contained. There's just constant cliffhanger quality that keeps you like logged in and interacting with the app. Like, wow, this was really great. I'm at chapter 5. I want to keep going. Oh no, I have no more coins, but I need to find out what happens next. Okay, I'll shell out the $5 for the next set of chapters, or I'll spend the time interacting with the app to get the next set of coins. So a lot of younger people, my students included, the way that they read their most recent books was through apps like this. So, and the people on the call, you may be also using something like this in the future. Someone in the chat, well, I don't know if you all can see the chat. I see like a question and answer chat. Somebody referred to this as gamification. I think Michael on the call. And that's exactly the right word. It's like gamifying books. It's making books like a game. And because, if you shell out $20 for a book, your financial contribution is over. But what if publishers could keep you hooked into an app to interact with it over and over and over. And maybe, yeah, you spend $10 here, $20 there, but you're spending a lot more time on that app, and it's on your phone. It's with you all the time. And you can play little games like every 3 chapters you get a free coin, and it kind of keeps you hooked up, basically, right? And the types of stories that are being told are conducive to that type of hooking. So for young readers, this is definitely what's happening right now. A few questions in the chat about this, because I see it's like an interesting topic, and I guess maybe I'll answer it during the Q&A session, but we'll get to it for sure. Okay, final bit. Has anyone been to a Chapters-Indigo recently? This is my last poll question. So some yes, some no. Interestingly, I think it was 85% or almost 90% of people said yes, they've bought a book in the past 6 months. And looks like it just went away, but I think it said 60 or so % of people have been in Indigo recently. And that's, that is it's a huge local mega bookstore where ostensibly people would be going as they go to the mall or walk by to buy something, right? But Chapters-Indigo isn't really much of a place for buying books these days. Here's a headline: Chapters-Indigo to phase out books to sell more fleece blankets and reading socks. Okay, this is actually a headline from the Beaverton, which is a fake like satire newspaper. But I think if you read this, any Canadian would like not be that surprised if this was actually true, right? Because when you go into a big store like that, what do you see? Blankets, socks, cups, plates, and things like that. And also they happen to have books. So what's going to happen to Chapters-Indigo? I think any Canadian might be curious about this. And I have a bit of a speculation just to give you sort of what the moving and shaking in the book world is. Waterstones, if anybody knows what that is a huge UK chain of bookstores. And you may also be familiar, if you've ever been to the States, with Barnes & Noble, which is a huge American chain of bookstores. Well, both of those companies were purchased by the same huge conglomerate. And they decided, what they decided to do with Waterstones and Barnes & Noble is to do the exact opposite of what those companies had been doing, which is very similar to what Chapters-Indigo is doing now. Barnes & Noble and Waterstones were also caught in this same loop of selling blankets, selling socks, selling plates and cups and things like that, and less so focused on books. But this conglomerate decided to, let's peel back, let's make these bookstores more book friendly and more reader friendly. Let's make that the stuff that we put in the window applicable to the local audience. Let's give our store managers the autonomy to arrange the store as they see fit. Let's take away all this merchandise and bring back a book focus. So what we may see happen, my guess, in 5 years, you could remember me if this happens, Chapters-Indigo will probably get acquired by that same conglomerate if they're interested in selling, which I have a funny feeling they may be. And you may see Chapters-Indigos look more and more like indie bookstores, like say a Book City here in Toronto, or Another Story, bookstores like that, where books are more central. And you may be surprised that for indie bookstores, they actually want to see something like Chapters be successful, because the more prominence we can give to bookstores in general, the more that business will come to indie stores as well. To create like a vibe and a book culture that is really thriving, and where people go and associate the idea of going into a bookstore and buying a book instead of a blanket is good for everybody. I think that the smart thing about what that conglomerate did with Barnes & Noble and Waterstones, and what I presume and speculate they may do with Chapters-Indigo in the future, is that it's a bit of counter programming against the stuff that we talked about at the beginning of this little presentation, right? Like apps and Amazon Prime-based content. For readers who aren't interested in those things, they want to have a place to go and a place to interact with and buy books that isn't so grounded in a phone or a tablet or their TV screen. So I'll end with just a little pitch that if you're interested in books here in Toronto or in Canada in general, you may or may not be familiar with these smaller indie-based publishers. I would recommend checking them out. I think that, you know, most people associate books with Penguin Random House or Simon & Schuster or Hachette or Macmillan or those really big publishing houses. And let's not forget that we have some really great Canadian-based independents who are doing awesome work here in this country. So here are just a few that you can check out. Sutherland House, based here in Toronto, is the place that I helped found a few years ago. This is just ending on a small recommendation and shout out. Hope that this was informative. Hope I didn't go too fast. I'll leave you with lots of time for questions that I am happy to answer. So thank you everybody for having me. Maybe you learned a little bit. And yeah, here I am, Q&A, let's do it.
That's great. Thank you so much for that timely and informative and interesting talk. So great, you've stopped sharing your screen. That's great. So now, as you said, we have some time for questions. We can see the Q&A has been fired up for a while, but just a reminder to the audience, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask some questions. And for those of you who are watching live on Facebook, you're also able to submit your questions through the comment section for the video there. So we're going to start with our first question. How do these changes that you've talked about, changes to the book industry, affect self-published authors?
Self-published authors. Well, I think that self-published authors are often interested in some kind of media pipeline as well. So people who I've talked to, people who are interested in getting books off the ground, tend to want to conceive of themselves as gaining an audience, you know, online first, and then what if this could transition to a show eventually? So I've seen some self-published stuff that has started to look like the Reese Witherspoon produced stuff of the world, right? Because they see like this is what hits, and this is like where the audience is. So of course it's savvy to follow along with that for sure. It does though, you know, with authors in general, I think someone like Mike in the Q&A asked, you know, how are authors in general reacting to this phenomenon, and how are they protecting their artistic integrity? And well, you know, like I said earlier in the talk, like for literary authors, I think this is less of less interest, you know, finding their book being produced on Amazon. But for people who are interested in the mass market, self-published or otherwise, they're all paying attention. And because I come from kind of like the business background, the artistic integrity part of it is less of importance than you might think when money is involved. They want to do good work. I want to do good work. We all want to do good work. But, you know, I don't mean to burst any bubbles or disillusion you, but you may be surprised that, you know, authors, at least mass market authors, their first question is, you know, what's my royalty? Which is not a bad thing, but artistic integrity tends to take a bit of a backseat. Yeah.
Mhm. So we have another the next question came from the audience. This tech pipeline sounds similar to what the music industry faced in the early 2000s, Napster, etc. How are authors reacting to this phenomenon, and how are they protecting their, well, I think their monetary interests is probably, because you just spoke a little bit to the artistic integrity. So what would you say about that?
Well, I do think that authors are increasingly savvy about contracts. I've noticed, and something that I really try to teach, like my students or anyone who's getting involved in the industry. This gets back to like the artistic integrity question. Let's worry about artistic integrity later. Let's make sure that your interests in the book that you're doing are protected, and how to be careful about what you sign away. So I think that authors are, there was a time, in the self-publishing world or first-time author world where I think people were less knowing about how they could be exploited. But there's such a community now of authors that talk to each other and say like, hey, don't sign this kind of contract. So I think that's something the internet has really made available, is like that knowledge, because the industry is kind of mysterious. And if you're a first-time author or a self-published author who's getting picked up for the first time by a bigger house, contracts could be sort of full of legalese and hard to read. So I think the authors are more savvy now about protecting themselves.
So it was really interesting what you talked about with Indigo and kind of what it's become. I can vouch for that. I usually go there to buy gifts, to be honest with you. And so that's really interesting. So another question that came in that kind of talks to that is, what are the chances of small bookstores returning? Do you see a return to that kind of old school style?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, so part of, I would like to see that happen. I think it will. I think that if Chapters-Indigo changed and became less of a gift store and more of a bookstore, there would be a thriving effect for the industry in general, and independence independence would reap the benefits from that. If they don't, and this goes to a question that Tom has in the Q&A, things that big companies want to do, gamification and so on, this isn't really beneficial to readers. Doesn't this open a lane for the non-giants who want to take a traditional approach? Yeah, and I think that that's totally true, and true not only of publishers, but true of bookstores too, right? So like if Chapters-Indigo doesn't change, it's not the end of the world. I think there's room for independence at large to take some, to take the audience. But I think those have to try a different approach, because what's happening right now, knowing a lot of independent bookstore owners and managers, it's hard to move the needle, when it comes to Amazon. So what they'll need to do differently, I don't know exactly. I think they're sort of mulling that over too. But is there an open lane where they could do something? I think yes, for sure.
So with that in mind, what would you say, what is the future for academic books and journals, with this emphasis on mass marketing, consumer drive, commodifying books, content franchising taking over? Do you think the big corporations will still permit the elite books to be part of their category?
I see.
Catalogs. What do you think?
Yeah, will smaller intellectual houses be swallowed up? That's already happened.
Yeah.
That's already happened. I mean, if you want to be really shocked, go to Penguin Random House and see how many imprints they have. It's just endless because they've acquired so much. And smaller houses that are artistic focused or intellectual focused have been cannibalized by the industry and these really big houses. Mostly like the bigger independents are staying independent as a matter of principle as well as money. As far as academic stuff goes, I don't know because it's not my field. I would imagine that academic books and journals won't be affected by this interest in mass market commodification? I don't know. You never know. I mean, in 10 years, the way we conceive of scholarly production may be completely different, but I don't think it's going to change. That's just my gut instinct, not like being an expert in the academic world.
So we're combining two questions here from Veronica and Iman. As the baby boomers pass on, do you think the physical book will maintain its popularity? Who do you think will be the new buyers of the physical book? And what do you think about the digital shift of books, heading towards ebooks, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I guess canary in the coal mine is my student base, who are all like between 18 and 23 years old. And they still, will this change? I don't think so, but you never know. But they still like physical books. It has meaning to them, and the stuff that you see on the apps, which they definitely do use, is more disposable and more ephemeral. So I think it's going to be a both and approach in the future. And if they really like something, they'll want to own it. I think that people have been afraid for physical books for a long time because of ebooks and the digital space and so on. And yeah, and someone mentioned in the comments like, oh, you only mentioned stuff on your phone. Like, what about tablets? Like tablets too. There's so many different ways you can read ebooks these days, right? Whether it's a tablet or a phone or whatever on your computer. But I don't think physical books are going away because of that tangibility. And there's something about them where they have a kind of cultural monument quality to them. So, there's been a bunch of stuff that's been on those apps that I mentioned that has then been published physically, and the students still buy it because they like it so much and they want to own it. And it's sort of theirs, I think we feel that way about books more than other things.
It's very interesting, especially as we get the perception that the younger generation doesn't care for the physical book so much, but that's interesting that they do. And with that, actually, what we wanted to know is, do you have any comment on the sales or stats of ebooks? Like, to your knowledge, do authors receive the same royalties from them, or is there actually a difference when it's an ebook versus a printed book?
From my experience in things, authors get a very similar royalty to the ebook, but you just tend to sell. Now, I come from the independent world, where the scale is made different from like a Penguin Random House. So if somebody from Penguin Random House may say something very different than I would, but in my experience, ebooks are maybe like 15% max of your total sales. So it's sort of like, it makes a difference if you do well, but you don't really put all your eggs in that basket.
So another hot topic right now is the book banning that's taking place in the United States. And so what do you think about that? Do you think some of the current cultural flashpoints around free speech are a threat to some sort of diversity in the publishing industry? And would you actually see this maybe starting to move into the Canadian landscape as well?
I don't know. I mean, I am originally American, and I came here to get away from some of that stuff, and I thought that I did, but there's been some stuff politically or culturally in the past few years that has led me to believe like Canada has caught America's cold, and it could happen, but I haven't seen any movement in that direction though, So could it happen? I can't say. I don't know enough about how to take the pulse of like the larger culture, but book-wise, I don't see that happening. It's mostly quite the opposite. Canadian focused publishers are really moving deeply into aiming for diversity and foregrounding it as like their special category, really. Because Canadian literature tends to not have as identifiable characteristics as most national cultures do. So leaning into diversity, freedom of speech in general, trying to create open dialogues seems to be what Canadian publishers are interested in. Will that change? I don't know. At least for right now, there isn't an Americanization of Canadian books that I can see.
Mhm. So one of our attendees would like to know if you have any recommendations for books on the publishing trade, both Canadian and international. So this person is familiar with Max Kimming's The Perilous Trade and wonders if there's any other texts you think are important contributions, or if you have any knowledge on.
From what I've read, stuff like the Content Machine, um, it's a little bit outdated now. So I think that this has moved. The industry has moved pretty quickly in the past like 10 years. So I haven't seen anything recently that could give you like the true 411 for like right now. Like most of the books I would tell you about are like 5 years old, 10 years old, and sort of like, well, this is kind of already outdated. In a way, and this is a really it's kind of a cheeky answer, but it's true. If you actually want to know like what's happening in books, and this may be distasteful to some of you, but go on TikTok. Like book talkers, like TikTok user creators who talk about books and like what's happening in the industry are super plugged in, and like that's part of the future. Like they are using these book apps that I'm talking about, and they are very savvy about creating a readership. Like when I was at this publishing house, we would pay these people like hundreds of dollars to like, can you hold our book up in front of the camera and say it's great, and say what you liked about it. And the big players, Penguin Random House or whatever, they do that too. So if you want to see like what's hot right now in books and understand how the industry works, I almost would say like don't even bother reading a book. Just like go on TikTok and look up book talk users, and you'll see something that's quite accurate because it's how the industry is trending, and the book talkers that make that content, like everyone under 30 that's interested in books like watches that stuff. So like that's what the field is going to be, I think.
So I confess myself to be part of Book Talk, actually.
Yeah.
And I get recommendations for different books that are upcoming, and it's really interesting. And I think they've even pushed certain authors to the limit. Like Colleen Hoover right now is all over TikTok, for example. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and publishing houses have seen like backlist titles explode. It's like, why? But we published this 10 years ago. Who cares? Oh, it's because some book talker that was popular said like, hey, this is great. And they have a following, So
so interesting.
Yeah, that's my recommendation. Instead of a book, look at TikTok.
I love it. Another question from someone in the audience is, could you comment further on the mega mergers in the industry and some of the turmoil surrounding Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, like these non-mergers? Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big 5 publishing houses, which we have right now, used to be the big 6, right? And Penguin and Random House got together. And if they had gotten Simon and Schuster, it would be the big 4. Penguin, Random House, Simon and Schuster would be a bit clunky to say. But if you look at all of these big houses, they may not be merging with each other just yet for legal reasons, but they've acquired so many smaller players, and just the list of imprints they have is incredible. So I think that is sort of a problem, because the fewer places authors have to submit, the less potential success they could have in like getting a good advance, and it creates fewer avenues for readers. This is, again, someone mentioned earlier, like a lot of stuff you're talking about gamification or whatever, these big companies, it benefits them, but what about like us as readers? And I think it's really true. I think that readers aren't served by these big mergers, and authors really aren't either. Stephen King, who couldn't be a bigger writer himself, said like, this is bad for the industry, right? But as far as my comment, what I would like to see happen is for the Canadian granting system that helps fund small independent Canadian owned publishing houses be a bit more robust. they tend to publish, they tend to fund like really, really small publishing houses without a lot of reach. And they aren't as interested in independents that want to go to mass market. But I think that if we want to have like a really thriving and exciting and rich Canadian publishing industry, I think like big independents that want to do mass market books is like needs to be part of that if we want to compete. Because you know, Penguin Random House, all these places are they're not Canadian owned. They're not even American owned. Like most of them are owned by some huge German conglomerate. And I think like the future of Canadian books could be leaning into Canadian owned independence. I would like to see that happen. Because you know, even like Penguin Random, like when they do Canadian, like Penguin Random House Canada doing Canadian content, like is only maybe 20% of their output. It's really mostly stuff that comes from the US. So anyway, that's just to say that the mergers are not great for authors, not really great for readers. And I think that if we could see more public money going to medium to larger scale Canadian independence, I think that would be great for Canadian readership, at least, to create an alternative, you know?
So we have a question from one of our audience members, Victor. He asks, how do you foresee the act of writing versus the changing book production consumer landscape?
So maybe this question is about sort of how authors are responding to all of these changes, and is it affecting their storytelling? Again, like I said earlier, like for literary stuff, artistic focused stuff, I don't know that it is. I don't think that it is. But for authors interested in mass market appeal and doing a good book plus selling a lot, it definitely will. Because they're going to take the notes, right? Like what gets picked up, what gets acquired, what is funneled from Penguin to Amazon. Well, maybe I should do something so somewhere on that path, right? So it will shape. Maybe not every single author, and plenty of authors, by the way. This is just sort of like there's no exact science to this. There are plenty of authors who will have great success not doing any of the things I've talked about. So just to make that clear. But a large majority of them who want to follow in these footsteps and try to get the same success will, I think, shape their manuscript submissions accordingly. I've definitely seen it happen.
So Mike wants to know, and I think this one's really amazing, what role will Chat GPT play in the future of authorship and publishing? Some micropresses and online lit mags are seeing a rise in usually detectable Chat GPT submissions. I know this is a very hot topic right now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what I would think, what I would say, having seen a lot of this kind of stuff recently, is I would compare it to like AI paintings,
Okay.
which have been around a bit longer. And these paintings, they look pretty good, like at first glance. But if you look closer, you'll see like a figure will actually have like 5 hands or 3 ears, or a painted woman's like hair will blend into the background, into the clouds or trees, because the AI just isn't capable of like delineating these boundaries. And there's something similar, I think, with AI produced writing that I've seen, where it looks good at first glance, but it can't really keep up at scale. And like producing a 300-page novel is like totally unintelligible. Like it can't develop characters over that time or a plot. Like it might look okay for a first chapter or like a first 10 pages, but if you pay attention to the whole thing, it totally falls apart. Like, could there be a time in the future where like that changes? I don't know. I don't know. But right now, no, I don't think so. Like I think it was Mike, right? Mike said,
Yes. Yep.
Usually detectable. And professors have been worried about this kind of stuff, like with their students. You know, oh, my students are going to be submitting these essays. It's like, I've seen some of this stuff, you know, right away. You just have to pay attention. So I think it's the burden will more be on editors and acquiring people who like can't, you know, be careless if they don't want to publish that kind of stuff. I mean, there may be a case, and I think that this is probably more realistic, what will happen with ChatGPT, of authors who use it creatively to do something cool or unique or weird, and like foreground the fact that they use this tool to like create something. I think that's totally, we're going to see that a lot. People who do it well, how often we'll see that, I don't know. But people who try, I think that could be something compelling. Like good stuff could come of it. But just books that are like straight up AI produced, a 400-page novel, it just can't do it. It just can't do it. Maybe someday. I have my doubts.
That's fair. That's
yeah.
fair. So our Q&A, as you see, was super active. So we are going to end on this question because we've gone a little bit over time. So I'm going to ask you one final question. This one was from Tom. And Tom writes, it's easy to see how gamification is beneficial to publishers, but it isn't clear how beneficial it is for readers. People are getting wise to not wanting to be hooked in by some of the big companies. Maybe most readers would just like to, buy a book. Doesn't this open a lane for the non-giants who can take a traditional approach?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that Tom's question was so good. I referred to it several times in this Q&A. So, and you're exactly right. I think that mostly what I've been trying to present to you during this sort of like, here's what the big players are trying to do, right? But I don't necessarily advocate for any of it. My heart is with like the independents. And I think that it's totally true that there is an open lane for people who want a more curated, book-focused experience. And if you're interested in seeing that happen personally as readers, like the independent publishers that I mentioned at the end of my little talk, buy from them directly and make a point of it, especially the smaller ones, because they keep 100% of that sale. You may not realize this, but if I sell a book through my publishing house on Amazon, I pay Amazon 50% of the cover price right away. So if the book costs you $30, I pay Amazon 15 of that off the top. And in the end, after paying all my costs, I probably make only $2. But buying something directly from a publisher that you like, though they keep 100% of the sale, which still has to account for, paying for printing and all that kind of thing. But they're going to keep a lot more of the money in the end. So if you're interested in the non-giants, and if you're interested in a traditional approach, and there's a publisher that you are that you feel a certain affinity for, buy from them directly. And buying from independent bookstores is good too, but even they take like a 40% cut. So if you want to see like a publisher you like that's doing something traditional, that's not doing apps or whatever, and you want to see that continue, you like what they're producing, go to them directly, buy it straight from their website. And yeah, that's how we're going to see this stuff continue in the future.
That note, that's really great. Everyone, go to the small publishers. I love it. So, Professor Bucemi, want to say thank you again so much for being with us today and taking the time. This has been an amazing talk. And as you see, our viewers were really interested in your questions. And again, we just want to thank you for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you for everyone who was watching and listening. It was great to be here.
Thank you again. So you're welcome to turn off your video, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
For those of you who would like to share today's session with family and friends, it will be posted to our YouTube page at youtube.com/YorkU alumni. You can also watch past lectures that you may have missed. We have one more poll question for you. How would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following this discussion? It should pop up on your screen now. Great, thank you. Join us for our next Scholars Hub at Home session. The Role of Mattering in Hope, Happiness, Health, and Fulfillment in Life on Wednesday, March 22 at noon. Register for that event and learn more about upcoming sessions at yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Thank you and be well.